Hi everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Govs on the Go, the Legacy Series, which features some of the retired professors we have here in the College of Arts and Letters at Austin Peay State University. My name is Dr. Buzzoon. I'm the Dean of the College. I'm also the host of the podcast. We are recording today's episode in beautiful Mabry Hall in the Music Mass Comm building, and my guest for this episode is Dr. Dewey Browder. Dr. Browder, thank you for being on the podcast.
Appreciate the invitation. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. We have been acquainted since I arrived. We'll get to that part and just a little bit about our involvement together. But I want to talk a little bit about your career. I really saw two different important sections that we will feature in today's talk. There's your time in the military, a distinguished time of growth with various experiences around the world, which I could just talk to you about your trips around different parts. But also there's your tenure here at Austin Peay, a time of teaching and impacting lives, both as a professor and in leadership in the Department of History and Philosophy. But before we get to that part of your story, let's talk about your early part of your life. You told me you grew up in Missouri.
That's correct.
How did that impact you growing up? What kind of things did a young Dewey like to do?
Well, I was a farm boy.
Okay.
The first 8 years of my life, my dad was a carpenter and he worked in Kansas City, and he always had an idea about self-sufficiency, and so we always had some kind of a little farm. And I was to the fifth of 6 boys. So he had plenty of farm hands, and he wanted us all to stay on the farm and keep on working, but we all left. My mom was really big on reading, and we went to town once a week, and she always made her first stop at the library, and she took us boys with her, and we always checked out books, and we took them home, and we did a lot of reading. And my dad had a serious accident when I was 8 years old, a construction accident that pretty much broke his back, and he had to retire. And so then he made himself a full-time farmer, and he was actually a sharecropper. So we paid our rent with corn or whatever it was we were growing. And I remember my mom's emphasis on reading and education almost daily in my life. And of the 6 boys, only 2 of us ever graduated from high school. The one next older than me, Walter, who also went to college. But the day I graduated from high school, she kind of looked me in the eye and she said, "Dewey, I'm really proud of you. You can do anything in this world you want to if you always do the best you can with what you've got right now." She was talking about a life of doing the best you can. So I've tried to live up to that little challenge that she gave to me.
Wow, that's awesome. You were, as a young person, I think this from the stories, also a pretty good athlete. Is that right?
Well, I played baseball,
okay.
And I was good enough to get an invitation to come for a tryout with a team called the Kansas City Athletics. They moved from Philadelphia to Kansas City in 1954, if I remember correctly. And I heard on the news this morning they're getting ready to leave Oakland. They left Kansas City and went to Oakland. But they invited me for a tryout. I was a middle infielder, played shortstop and second base. And I had 2 tryouts. And after the second one, the scout told me, he said, "You know, I think you could be the next Billy Martin." Now that name may not mean a lot to you, but he was quite an infielder for the New York Yankees and later a manager. He said, "But you know what? You're going to be drafted. Why don't you join the Army, eat everything you can get your hands on, come back and see me in 3 years?" Well, I joined the Army. I ate everything I could get my hands on, but I never went back. I was stationed in Germany the Army trained me as a photographer, and I loved it. It was just absolutely enjoyable, every minute of it. And I was stationed in Germany, and I met a young lady there that turned out to be my wife, and we've traveled the world together. But that first assignment in the Army, I was with the military intelligence, working with counterintelligence agents, and it was really, really revealing. The agent that I worked most closely with was trilingual, and I was really impressed. He spoke German, he spoke Polish, and of course English. He told me he learned German at home, but he had to do the rest at college. So that kind of was a marker for me to start thinking about college.
Broadening your horizons.
Right, yeah.
So you go from being a possible farm boy in Missouri to maybe an athlete and a baseball player to now you're in the military, and as you said, your first entry was as a photographer.
Correct.
So now you had some time to reflect back. Do you see that as a photographer you're recording a moment in time of history, and that this sort of the role of history also in your life?
Well, to a degree, but most of my work was not associated with preserving things for history or for memory, but to facilitate counterintelligence operations at the moment. Later on, I was assigned to Colorado Springs. Once I decided to make a career out of the Army, I was assigned to Colorado Springs as a photographer. And I had an opportunity there that has been brought to my attention at Austin Peay. I took the first photograph in history of the laser light.
Okay.
The National Bureau of Standards was experimenting with it, and the Army was interested in using it as an anti-missile weapon to knock down incoming Soviet missiles in the event of war, sort of a prelude to SDI. And they loaned me to the National Bureau of Standards. I took that picture. It's in the Smithsonian now. Last time I looked, they had a display of it in the Science Building here at Austin Peay.
So it is part of the history.
It is part of history. It is, indeed, yes.
So when did you mentioned the inspiration, sort of the marker in your life that you're around people that that are outstanding people. When did you decide to take on, I'm going to improve my educational status?
Well, once I decided I was going to be a soldier and be a soldier for life, so to speak, I decided I wanted to be an officer rather than an enlisted man. And in order to be an officer, I needed to have a degree. So while I was in Colorado Springs, I started going to school at nights and on weekends, and accumulated enough credits that I had the equivalent of 2 years, and then I applied for an Army scholarship, and the Army gave me a fully funded scholarship to get a bachelor's degree in data processing and statistical analysis. And so after I got that degree, this was during the Vietnam War, after I got that degree, I applied for a direct commission and got it. So I converted from I was a staff sergeant when I was going to that civilian university. I was wearing civilian clothes all the time, but I converted from being a staff sergeant to being a lieutenant.
Okay. Now, at some time, I'm interested, you mentioned that while you were still working in the military, you wrote a book on a German city. Yes, the city of Zweibrücken in Rhineland-Pfalz.
My family and I were stationed there, and my wife Helga is a native speaker of German, and she was very active in the international women's club movement, and president of it, as a matter of fact. And we had an organization in Zweibrücken and in Rhineland-Pfalz called Little NATO, a junior officers' Little NATO. And I was very active in that. And we had French officers, we had German officers, Canadian officers, American Air Force, American Army, and so forth. And I was president of that for a while. But I saw very early that there was a big problem in the Zweibrücken community with so many international folks there. The only histories available were in German. We didn't have anything in English. So I decided I was going to write a book. And a good friend of ours, Herr Motz, I told him about it, and the next day he showed up on my door with a reading list for me to start working. And so I started working on it, and it's I called it Zweibrücken yesterday and today, and it's a history of the city of Zweibrücken.
Okay. But that's interesting. Nobody asked you to, but you did it, and I think that shows
It needed to be done.
it needed to be
Right,
done.
it needed to be done.
That's the kind of thing that Dewey Browder does. He just picks up the mantle and takes it on. So when did you realize that you might have an interest in teaching, and how did that opportunity come about?
Well, my experience on campus as a student, I was impressed with many of the faculty members. But then after I left Zweibrücken, the Army assigned me to teach military science at Louisiana State University.
Okay.
And so I was assigned there, and I taught military history and several courses in military science. And I really enjoyed it. And I applied to get into a PhD program there, and they accepted me on a part-time basis. So I did part-time work studying for my PhD. And then I contacted the Department of the Army and said, look, I'm getting a PhD. Do you think there's a chance I might be able to teach at West Point someday? And they said, absolutely. And so they left me there for an additional year after I'd finished my teaching assignment. The LSU had a requirement for one year full-time work on campus for doctoral students. And so I was able to do that. And so I left there as a PhD ABD and went to Command and General Staff College in Kansas. And after that, I went back to Europe, and I wrote my dissertation when I was stationed in Europe.
Okay.
And actually finished it all up after my assignment in Germany. I was the Adjutant General of the U.S. Army in Italy, Greece, and Turkey. And I finished the dissertation there and came back for the ceremony, and it was fun. Then I went to West Point.
Then you went to West Point, okay. Well, I want to get back to the 80s because I think that, you, as you said, you were the AG, Deputy AG when you went to Europe, and also worked as a political advisor and speechwriter to the Commander-in-Chief. What are some of your favorite memories from that time?
Well, let me kind of define the organizational structure just so you'll understand what I'm talking about. The major American unit in NATO is called USAREUR, the United States Army Europe. And the commander of that is called the Commander-in-Chief, or CINC, C-I-N-C, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Army Europe. And that was a four-star general. And he needed a new speechwriter. And so they did sort of, it turned out to be a nominative assignment where they searched through the archives and the files of personnel records and so forth in the Army. And I applied for the job, and I was chosen for that. So I was his speechwriter, and I was there for 4 years. I wrote 354 major speeches during that time, including congressional testimony. And the most important speech I wrote was about the Strategic Defense Initiative of Ronald Reagan's. And it came about this way. Ronald Reagan, of course, we were fielding the Pershing II missiles, which is another story I'll get to here in a minute, hopefully. Fielding the Pershing II missiles in Europe. And there was a big controversy because the Soviets had SS-20 missiles there, SS being surface-to-surface missiles. And we were countering with the Pershing missiles. And it kind of tore Germany apart and many of the NATO countries because the Russians, the Soviets had a tremendous propaganda program going on where they were convincing the civilians, primarily in Germany, that America planned to conduct a nuclear war and leave Germany a mess of smoldering ruins. Of course, that wasn't true at all. And then President Reagan came up with his idea of the Strategic Defense Initiative, which the media quickly dubbed Star Wars. And it too was very, very controversial. Chancellor Kohl, who was the Chancellor of then West Germany, contacted my boss, General Otis, and said he'd like to do a public endorsement of the Strategic Defense Initiative, and he'd like to do it on American territory. So we agreed that we would meet at the big training area right near Grafenwehr. Every American who ever served in Germany knows about Grafenwehr and Vilseck. We were actually at Vilseck. And so General Otis and I went down and we met with him, and I was really flattered the way General Otis introduced me to Chancellor Cole. He said he's my NATO political advisor. Well, General Otis, the four-star, the SINC, was simultaneously the commanding general of the Central Army Group for NATO in Europe. And that was the American Army, the French Army. Even though the French wasn't actually participating, we were actively planning with them. The Canadians, because they had Air Force stationed in Germany, and they provided us with air support, and of course the German Army. So it's a big political position that he had. And during that meeting that we had with Chancellor Cole told me, he said, I would like for you to put your personal mark on this strategic, endorse it personally. And so the two of them decided that General Otis would give a speech that would become widely publicized in Europe. And he turned to me and he said, Dewey, I want you to write that speech.
So he's saying, wait a minute.
Yeah.
The old the farm boy from Missouri is now tasked with this international important speech.
So I didn't question him. I just said yes, sir. So in the helicopter on the way back to Heidelberg, which is where we were stationed, I told him, I said, you know, I really don't know enough about the SDI to write a speech on it. He said, neither do I. He said, I want you to talk to my scientific advisor. And so the scientific advisor was right next door to me. It was easy for me to talk to him. And he said, you know, there are a lot of doubts about this, but I'll tell you what, I'll put you in contact with the scientific advisor that has been feeding President Reagan. So he put me in contact with that scientific advisor in the White House, who said, I'm going to link you up with President Reagan's speechwriters. So he linked me up with their speechwriters, and they sent me material that they had used in background material. So I put the speech together, and then General Otis invited NATO officers who had ever served with the American Army and had earned the Legion of Merit, which is a pretty high award. He invited them to all gather together in our major conference room there in Heidelberg, and he delivered this speech, and we translated it into several different NATO languages, German, French, I can recall specifically. I think it was also in Spanish and maybe Italian. And he encouraged them to take that speech and go home and use that as a foundation for what they said to their people in their own communities. And so this came to be known as the NATO SDI speech. In 1997, to jump forward a little bit, when I was here at Austin Peay, we had as a guest speaker on campus the then Russian ambassador to the United States, a man by the name of Yuli Vorontsov. And he was here at Austin Peay as a speaker, and I went to hear him speak. And at the end of his speech, I asked him, I said, how important was the fielding of the Pershing II missile in bringing an end to the Cold War? He said it was absolutely essential. We need to get to the Pershing missile here in a minute, I guess. But he said it was absolutely essential. He said, but the thing that really convinced Gorbachev to go to the and he was, during this crisis with the Pershing missiles and the SS-20s, he was the Soviet ambassador to France. So he had a front row seat to all of this because France was intimately involved in this also. But he said, the SDI is what convinced Gorbachev to go to the negotiating table. He said, we thought you guys could do it and we couldn't figure it out. So he said that was what brought Gorbachev to the negotiating table. And of course we know the Cold War ended, and Vorontsov put that level of influence of the Strategic Defense Initiative there.
That's quite a height that you.
Let me say something about the Pershing II missiles,
Sure?
Okay, if I may. The Pershing II missile, we had a missile in Europe called the Pershing, but it didn't carry a nuclear warhead. And the Soviets in the late 1970s, I think it was in 78, they fielded a missile called the SS-20, surface-to-surface SS-20, and it had 3 independently targetable warheads, and they were nuclear. So they could fire one missile and hit Rome, Paris, and London with the same missile because the 3 warheads went in different directions. So we committed to fielding something to counter that. So we took the Pershing missile and put a nuclear warhead on it and fielded it in Europe under the control of NATO. And that was what the big controversy was about that caused the SDI to come up. And then while I was working as a political advisor and speechwriter, my wife, Helga, was a liaison person between the German government and headquarters USAR, the United States Army Europe. She organized conferences and brought German politicians into the headquarters for information briefings and so forth. It was all fun.
Yeah, and you retired. You had a number of different awards. Which one are you most proud of?
The Legion of Merit that I got, the first Legion of Merit, I got it 3 times. But the first one was for being the political advisor and speechwriter. And a couple of the things that I did that I haven't mentioned. During the Cold War, starting about 1947, it was obvious that the Americans and the French and the British and the Soviets were at each other's throats, even though they had been allies during the course of the war. So they created what was called the Torgau meeting. Now, Torgau is a place in Germany right outside of Berlin where the Soviets and the Americans first met and shook hands in 1945 at the end of the war. So this Torgau meeting, we met once a year, and we got all together in a social environment and got to know each other. And and my wife and I were both members of the American delegation in 1984. In 1985, early in the year, a Soviet soldier shot and killed an American major who was accredited. His name was Nicholson. They shot and killed him while he was on duty with approval of the Soviets in East Germany. And I wrote the American protest that was delivered to the Soviets. And then I met with them, and it took us about a year to sort this all out. But I did that, and that was part of the reason for the Legion of Merit. The Pershing II missile issues, the SDI speech, those things are all contributed, and they gave me the Legion of Merit when I left Heidelberg.
Wow.
In 1986.
So, you know, one of the things that I always like to mention is while you're here for those 13 years, you received the Hawkins Award, the Distinguished Professor Award, the Faculty Community Service Award, which is, again, a special one. Your students graduated, have been very successful. Have you thought about your teaching impact on the people that have progressed through Austin Peay?
Well, yes, sometimes. Matter of fact, I had a very pleasant experience a couple of years ago. The commanding general out of Fort Campbell, Joseph McGee, was speaking here on campus. And Ron Smithfield, who's quite an active person in the local community here, asked me, he said, "Dewey, do you know General McGee?" And I said, "Well, there are a lot of people named McGee. We'll see." I walked in that room, and there was Cadet McGee right before my eyes. He'd been one of my students at West Point, in a European history major. And after the program was over, I walked up to say hi to him, and I put out my hand. He said, "You're Colonel Browder." So he remembered me after all those years. And he still looked like he was young enough to be a cadet. And I'll also mention that one of my students up there, Neil Zuckerman, I recently saw him on the list of the newest billionaires in America. He spent about 8 or 9 years on active duty, and then he got into media management, your kind of business.
For all the money.
And made $1 billion. Nick Tooley here in town is an attorney. He's going to be part of the Road to 250. He's going to deliver the program on westward expansion. He was really a good student here.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that's how we met. You showed up on my doorstep and said, "Hey, I've got this plan in a couple of years to do a project called the Road to 250 America's Story." And I thought, okay, I don't know if Dewey Browder knows. I mean, who knows if they'll still want me around here in 2 years. But fortunately, they have wanted me, and you wanted to have my involvement in that. And it's been a wonderful community event. it honors America's semi-quincentennial. Hopefully I said that
You
right.
did.
And so won't you tell us about how you came up with this project and a little bit about it?
Well, we're getting ready to celebrate America's 250th birthday. And the musical director for Cumberland Winds, Mike Ritter, he and I are good friends. We're both in the Sons of the American Revolution. And we were commenting one day about, as we draw closer to this big event, things are going to get really crowded. We need to have some sort of central control point or registration. We need to do something where we've got some community level management. So we both sent recommendations, a joint recommendation to the two mayors saying we need to do something about that. So that's what we're doing now. July the 31st of this year, both mayors, the CG out at Fort Campbell, the executive director of the Wings of Liberty Museum out at Fort Campbell, and President Licari all authorized a proclamation saying we're going to celebrate under the title of the Road to 250. And so that's what we're doing. And right now, it's kind of a two-pronged attack. The one that you're involved in is called the Road to 250, America's Story, and that consists of 12 thematic, dramatic readings about American history. And we just did the first one where we talked about the evolution of democratic thought. We're getting ready to do the next one, the American Revolution, but we're going to also do writing of the Constitution, the military in America, American society, education in America, medicine in America, and each one of those will feature actors in costume that act out iconic moments and deliver iconic speech lines like Patrick Henry and so forth. And so that's what we're doing, and we're doing it right here on this stage, and we had a dress rehearsal 2 days ago for the next event. The Roxy is giving us costumes. I'm having trouble finding actors, but all the people, the narrators, are experts in their own individual area.
Well, and hopefully over that period of time until we get to the actual celebration, people will be able to stop in and find out about our history. It really was a wonderful event and I'm thankful that you asked me to be a part of that.
Can I mention the other prong? I said it's two-pronged.
Yeah.
One is the Road to 250. The other one is the Road to 250 Community Spirit in Action. And we're inviting and have invited dozens of community organizations around Clarksville, Montgomery County area to give us short essays between 250 and 750 words telling us what their organization has done and is doing to facilitate American success in the spirit of e pluribus unum, out of many one. And we're getting good responses. I'm working with the Arts and Heritage Council on that, Ellen Canervo, and we've already published a couple of, Clarksville Now has given us the publishing support.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing that in the community. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
My pleasure, Buzz, my pleasure.
And thanks to all of our listeners and viewers out there for supporting this podcast. And we hope that you'll continue to join us as we tell the story of the College of Arts and Letters here at Austin Peay State University. So until next time, stay safe, take care, and God bless.